Hi, Daniel. Would you say
Hey,
hi
good
real quick?
evening.
Oh, good. Just want to make sure. I'll mute myself.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Hey, good evening, everybody. We're going to give it another 2 or 3 minutes to get started. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll be started momentarily. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Arturo, if you're ready as well. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this presentation of the draft plan for the West Oak Cliff Area Plan.
Buenas noches todos. Gracias por estar aquí con nosotros esta noche para platicar sobre el borrador del plan de la reunión comunitaria.
So we'd like to let everyone know that there are closed captions available in I think it's over 90 languages, but there's closed captions available in multiple languages as well as English. All you have to do is at the bottom of your screen, there's that little icon that looks like a little robot with 2 eyes. If you click on that, that should allow you to access closed captioning.
Sí, hay, para los que quieren subtítulos, hay subtítulos disponibles en inglés, español o cualquier otro idioma de su selección. Para hacerlo, haga clic en el icono de subtítulos en la esquina para seleccionar el idioma y mostrar los subtítulos.
So just to get started, just a few quick housekeeping items. If you're not speaking, please keep yourself on mute. We will have an opportunity for questions at the end. You can use the chat feature to ask questions or provide comments throughout the meeting. And then to ask a question at the end, please raise your hand. The image on the screen should show all of those icons and how to do that.
Antes de empezar, tenemos unos cuantos anuncios. Por favor, si no estás platicando, silencio mientras no estés hablando. Para los que quieren usar el chat, la función del chat está disponible para preguntas. Y por favor, también utilice la función de levantar la mano si tienes preguntas en su menú de reacciones.
And perhaps Arturo and Joe, it might be good to put those instructions in the chat just to help people as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce myself. My name is Daniel Church. I'm a service area planning supervisor in the city's planning and urban design department. I'm joined tonight by two of my coworkers, Arturo Del Castillo and Joseph Moss, who will be helping answer questions in the chat in both Spanish and English. But without further ado, I want to turn it over briefly to Mayor Pro Tem Chad West from District 1 and give him a chance to introduce the meeting and have a few words.
Thank you, Daniel. Can you guys hear me and see me okay?
Yeah, we can hear and see you. I'm going to unshare my screen so that we can see a full screen.
Ah, cool. All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry. You might have a weird video here. I'm at another event tonight, but this is so important. I wanted to make sure I was available and be able to welcome everybody. You know, when I first joined the City Plan Commission before I ran for office, Scott Griggs had appointed me. I came in on the very day that El Corazon, which was a beloved building at Zane and Davis, was torn down, and neighbors didn't know about it. And as we know now, a CVS had bought it and consolidated lots and put that up. And that was the original moment, I guess, that I've said to myself, listen, if I ever run for public office and I'm going to represent this district, we're not going to allow that kind of thing to happen again without good community input. That was old zoning that had been there since the 1950s and 60s, and it hadn't been changed. There had been no neighborhood engagement, and it was just completely left up to the market. And if you leave it up to the market, then you know, it's not always an awful thing, but in this case, it was a situation where you had an outside group, in this case, the CVS development group, that saw that this was a great opportunity to make some money, and they took down what was a beloved building, and they also built you know, a parking lot right there in an area that would make sense to have something a little bit more. So for Daniel, a real quick question: are we gonna translate this portion of it, or should I wait for translation?
We've got everything on closed captioning being translated in multiple languages currently.
This is okay. Then I'll keep going. So this has been going on, this process with neighborhood representatives from across West Oak Cliff for I feel like it's been going on for a year and a half. Daniel and his team can probably tell you better than me. But at the end of the day, what we need to make sure is that whatever happens, whether we're putting in preservation, whether people want to see development, whether you want to see something that's a little bit in between, and whether you want to see parks in certain areas or you want to see more bus lanes or bike lanes, all that stuff needs to be neighborhood driven, because if we don't have a plan, then it's going to be left up to people who might not live in the neighborhood to create it for us. And so this plan is so important. It's come a long way. The engagement's come a long way with the community, and staff's done a lot of hard work, as has our task force of neighborhood representatives. Tonight is, I believe, just a presentation to give everybody an overview of the work that's been done, and by staff and by the task force, and together community feedback at the end. But over the next couple of months, we're going to be relying on you, who's here tonight, and your neighborhood associations or your neighbors, if you don't have one, to review the plan and read through it and tell us what it got right, what it didn't get right, what didn't get right, and what needs to be changed. And that will all be very important. Now, our planning commissioner for District 1, Commissioner Amanda Popkin, who is, I know, she's a big neighborhood advocate as well. Amanda is going to be sitting through this call with you. I'm going to try to chime back in at the end to hear questions, but if I don't get back, then I'll listen to the video feedback later. And then I will be there on Saturday for anybody who's able to join us live for a town hall on Saturday at Martin Weiss Park. In the meantime, if you have any questions about this process, you know, please don't hesitate to email my office. This has been very staff driven for the last few months, because we didn't want this to be political. This is about the neighborhoods, and this is about preservation. It's about planning for the next 10, 20, 50 years. And I wanted it to be something that's a step away from the politics that come with city council. It will eventually get there, But for now, it's at staff level, it's at the neighborhood level. And this is where 99.9% of it needs to be worked on. So thank you for joining us tonight, for caring about Oak Cliff, and for playing a part in this, in the biggest and I think most significant area plan that we've looked at for the future. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Council Member. Commissioner Popkin, if you'd like to speak, I'll give you a few minutes.
Hi, this is Amanda Popkin. I just got home from taking flyers to Fiesta on Jefferson and meeting some cool neighbors and really trying to get the word out about the meeting tonight and this Saturday. I'm so excited that we have a draft plan, and I'm really excited to hear the update tonight. Thanks so much for holding this.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Hopefully that comes through and everybody can see everything. Everything look good?
Yes, looks
Okay.
good.
I was going to say no news is good news, I guess. Give me just 1 second while I kind of get my screen situated. Also, just want to let people know, as in the chat, there's the instructions about how to access the closed captioning if you missed the opening slides. All right, well, without further ado, I'll keep us moving. Again, thanks everybody for being here this evening. I also want to introduce our task force that Mayor Pro Tem West mentioned. So the task force was appointed by the council member. We have 16 representatives from the community. We have a representative from every neighborhood association in West Oak Cliff, and we also have some other neighborhood stakeholders and representatives, as well as a representative from Heritage Oak Cliff. And the whole task force is chaired by former Plan Commissioner Mike Anglin. So they've been incredibly instrumental in helping with this process. We've had 13 task force meetings over the past 22 months when we started in May of 2020, and those have gone long on Monday evenings, and they've really been extremely helpful in collecting community input and helping provide a voice for this area. So for tonight's agenda, I'm going to start by just giving a background on the area plan for folks who maybe haven't been as involved the whole time. And then I'm going to dive into kind of the 5 main sections that we have for the plan. Those are land use and development, transportation and infrastructure, inclusive community development, and parks and open space. And then I'll talk about the focus areas, next steps, and then we'll open it up to questions. And again, if you've got questions throughout the meeting, feel free to drop them in the chat. We've got staff available to help answer those. So to get started, we're just going to have, we're going to start with some polling questions just to get some feedback on who's here. I do see that we've got 55 folks on the meeting, which is great. And so let me go ahead and open up some polling questions just so that we can learn a little bit about you. Again, this is not for, the only purpose of this data is for us to know who we're engaging, so that if it looks like, that there's a zip code that we don't have as high of a turnout from, or if there's a group that we need to be engaging harder, it helps us do that. So this is entirely for internal purposes. It's anonymous, and we're not going to be sharing any of this information. So we'll give it just a few minutes for people to answer these questions. All right, why don't we go ahead and I'll close the poll. It'll give people a few more seconds and keep us moving. But I appreciate everybody's input on that this evening. So just a little bit of background for the West Oak Cliff Area Plan. I see a lot of familiar faces and names on the call, so happy to have you here. But for folks who haven't been as involved in this process, just a little bit about where we're planning, the exact geography. West Oak Cliff is about a 5 square mile area that is bounded by Illinois on the south, Cockrell Hill on the west, Davis on the north, and Tyler and Vernon over on the east. And a little bit of why this plan was initiated and what's the purpose of the plan. So this is an area that has 3 DART stations. We know that from a developer's perspective, we know that developers are often looking at areas around transit as opportunities for development. And so it's really important that the city get out in front of potential upcoming development to establish a community vision, to hear from you exactly what you want to see in these areas, so that what gets built or doesn't get built in the future aligns with your vision. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, on the map you see in purple, you see all of the 5 authorized hearings that were previously filed. So an authorized hearing is essentially a process where City Council or City Plan Commission looks at an area and says, we need to study the zoning further to determine if this is the correct zoning for an area. It doesn't mean that the zoning is going to change. It just means that the zoning could change. So these areas were filed before the authorized hearing, before the area plan began. And it's the way our authorized hearing process has changed at City Hall. The process used to be first come, first serve. So if you were 10th in line, you had to wait for the other 9 to go before you. Now it's changed to the areas that have an authorized hearing, an area plan for that area established, move to the top of the list. So by doing this area plan, it helps those areas, those authorized hearings move forward. And then lastly, this is an area we know that with the success and the growth in Bishop Arts and North Oak Cliff, development pressure is moving this way. And so it's really important for the entire area to have a very solid land use development vision, so that what happens in the future aligns with what the community wants to see. So in terms of the desired outcome, first and foremost is to establish that land development vision. So this will be a future land use map. I know that we've just put in the chat, there is an interactive future land use map that's available on our Social Pinpoint website. You can type in your address there and see, of an area of interest. In terms of another purpose of this area planning process is to inform the rezoning process. So I already talked about those authorized hearings. It has helped us identify what the community wants to see in those areas. Third has been to create a framework around infrastructure improvements for streets and for parks. We've heard a lot of really great feedback about where people want bike lanes or sidewalks or roadway improvements or park improvements, and we've captured that in this plan. And then fourth, identifying any other priorities related to land use that exist in this area. So as I mentioned, the task force has met 13 times over the last 22 months, and we've actually met 4 times this calendar year. So we've been really busy and bringing this draft plan to fruition. And I just want to again thank all 16 of them for being so diligent and involved in the process. In terms of schedule, we're getting towards the end. So you can see that we're at the where the draft plan is being released to the public. It's available online starting this morning. So you can click on the link that's in the chat, and we've got the full draft plan. We've got a Spanish draft that the first 3 chapters have been translated into Spanish. We're currently in the process of translating the full plan, and we're going to get that on the full plan in Spanish online in the coming days. And we've got a Spanish and English executive summary currently and the executive summary contains all of the recommendations, everything that all the recommended actions are included in those executive summaries. So those are a more condensed version of the long plan. So right now we're in the process of wanting to just hear from the community what we got right, what we didn't get right, so that we can take all the feedback, work with the task force to get the plan aligned with the community's values and vision before we bring it forward to adoption. In terms of engagement, we've had really excellent engagement throughout this process. We've had over 500 people at our online meetings. I see that we've got 55 people online right now. We've had 270 people at our in-person events. We have an in-person event scheduled for Saturday, and I'll talk more about that at the end. We've had almost 600 surveys completed, and over 8,500 people visit our website. Just wanted to show some of the pictures. I know a lot of you may see yourself in here. These are some pictures from our meetings back in October and November. We had really great turnout at these events, and all the input that we heard both on our online survey tool as well as in person has all found its way into this plan. So next, just want to open one more poll. We just want to hear from you if you've attended any of the meetings and how you heard about this. This is really helpful for us to know, you know, what's the most effective way for us to get the word out and how maybe we could do better in getting the word out. So let me go ahead and launch that second poll. Right. Hopefully everybody can see that. So I'll give everybody a few minutes to answer these questions as well. All right, well, people are wrapping up the poll. I'm gonna keep us moving into the next section of the presentation. Thank you again for answering these questions. It's very helpful for us to know, you know, the most effective ways to stay in touch with people. So in terms of plan goals and framework, we started with these 7 initial planning goals, which some of you may recall from past meetings. And so I'll read through those briefly. And those are: protect existing single-family neighborhoods, preserve natural areas and expand public parks and trails, preserve historic buildings by encouraging renovation and reuse, encourage businesses that are compatible with the surrounding neighborhoods, retain current residents and attract new residents by encouraging new and affordable housing choices, improve transportation access through better street design and suitable development around dark light rail stations, and create walkable neighborhood centers that provide a variety of work, shopping, cultural, and living opportunities. So we brought that out to the public last summer and really used that as a starting point to collect input. And, you know, we asked people, you know, to rank them, and by far the #1 concern and top priority was to protect existing family neighborhoods. But all of that in the input that we collected through those meetings allowed us to establish the framework for this plan. So we worked with the task force to establish the plan values and the plan vision that help drive the entire plan. And then all the recommendations and items really pretty easily grouped into 4 main buckets, which was land use and development, inclusive community development and quality of life, parks and open space, and transportation and infrastructure. And so those 5 plan values that, using what we heard from the community and working with the task force, those 5 values were: West Oak Cliff is equitable, enriching, safe and healthy, economically resilient, and welcoming. And then the vision statement that was crafted by the area plan task force was: West Oak Cliff is an equitable, enriching, and welcoming neighborhood that celebrates its people, its history, its culture, and prioritizes the safety, health, and economic resilience of its residents. Residents and stakeholders in West Oak Cliff envision a neighborhood with a high quality of life that ensures housing and retail affordability for its residents, preserves its unique single-family neighborhoods, protects and enhances existing natural amenities and assets, creates new opportunities for parks, recreation, and natural amenities, provides a safe environment for pedestrians and cyclists, celebrates its historic buildings and culture, and provides walkable destinations for its residents. West Oak Cliff is a sustainable neighborhood that supports local minority and women and immigrant-owned local businesses, promotes local artists and public art, provides human-scaled and human-focused development, and has access to critical community resources. So using that as a starting point and all of the input that we got through our October and November meetings around the focus areas, that really allowed us to begin to craft some recommendations. And again, we're going to go through each of the four main framework categories, and then I'll dive into the focus areas specifically. All of these were written and worked on with the task force. We spent hours and taking what we heard from the community and trying to craft recommendations and action items that could be implementable and things that align with the community's vision.
Yeah, invite her over.
If you're not on mute, could you please mute yourself? So we have for the 4 frameworks, we have 74 action items. I'm not going to read. For folks who are not muted, can we mute ourselves just so we don't have a lot of feedback? Thank you very much. So for the 4 frameworks, we have 74 action items and recommendations. I'm not going to read through all of those because that would take a really long time, but I do encourage you to take a look at the plan and that can be found in the link. Additionally, at the in-person meeting on Saturday, we're going to have that available. It was just a really long list of items to put on a slide, and it would be really hard to read. But all of those fit into 4 main objectives for each framework, and so I'll read through those through each of those objectives. So for parks and open space, the first objective was to create opportunities for smaller parks, plazas, and parklets in existing neighborhood nodes. Public school sites should be utilized as opportunities for public green space. Create new and enhance existing green linkages, utilizing public or city streets and right-of-way wherever possible, and improve and enhance existing green spaces. And so for each of the frameworks, we have a map that kind of serves as a vision illustration that captures a lot of these priority projects and action items. And so again, I'm not going to read through each one of these, but this is all found in the plan as well as in the executive summary. So a good example of one of the action items that was recommended through what we heard from the community is item number 1 that you see here on the map. So between Martin Weiss Park and Westmoreland Park, Coombs Creek Drive on the western side of West Oak Cliff is a really wide right-of-way that is a 2-lane road, but there's a lot of extra land that's just mowed grass. And so there's a great opportunity to reimagine that corridor to have a trail and other open space opportunities that benefit the neighborhood and also connect the 2 parks. We know that there's long-term vision for a trail through the 5 Mile Creek to extend from south of Illinois. And so connecting Westmoreland Park to that, and then further north all the way up to Martin Weiss Park, and then eventually in the future beyond to Coombs Creek Trail, could create one continuous trail through this entire area. So there's a great opportunity there. Second, yeah, we're sure yes. We're going to have a time for questions at the end.
Okay, sorry, I just joined. Okay.
Oh, no, it's okay. And if you have a question, you can also I'll throw it in the chat and it can get answered immediately as well. So second framework is inclusive community development and quality of life. And so the 4 objectives on that are to ensure neighborhood affordability through strategic policies and programs. This was an item that we heard throughout the process is a major concern and action item related to concerns about gentrification and long-term affordability of the neighborhood. Second objective is support local minority, immigrant, and women-owned small businesses. Third is promote local arts and culture through initiatives and dedicated physical space. And then fourth is enhance safety through improved design of buildings and public realm. So here's another vision illustration for this section. Some of these items kind of overlap with the land use and development section. So I'll highlight some of those, but some of the other things that you see relate to programming opportunities at Martin Weiss Park, and that's something that the Office of Arts and Culture is very interested in, working with the community in bringing more programming to Martin Weiss. As a part, of the affordability conversation, one of the biggest concerns and priorities for the community was to maintain the neighborhood character of these areas. At the same time, as land values, property values continue to escalate, we know that just the price of a single family home is continuing to go up and continues to become more unaffordable for residents in the area. And so there's an opportunity to explore allowing some additional types of missing middle housing. So those would be things like accessory dwelling units or granny flats and backyards, allowing duplexes, allowing triplexes and quadplexes on some really large lots that exist throughout West Oak Cliff. This is all near transit, not to be, this is in the areas of purple, so it's not the entire area. It's just in those areas that are near the DART stations. So that's one of the many recommendations in this section. And I see a comment in the chat about a dog park for Ravinia Heights. There's, one of the recommendations is to explore putting a dog park at Moss Park. There's currently a dog park master plan ongoing from the Parks Department, but the recommendation that we had, we have recommendations for a dog park somewhere in West Oak Cliff, with Moss Park being a priority. That's being passed along to the Parks Department, and they'll be the ones who'd be implementing that, but they're aware that there's a desire and a need in this area, and they hope to implement one in the future. So for transportation and infrastructure, the four main objectives are: prioritize new sidewalk and sidewalk repair to improve accessibility, utilize design improvements within the public right-of-way to enhance placemaking and safety, construct new multimodal improvements and bike lanes throughout West Oak Cliff, and provide traffic calming through street design enhancements. So the map that you see here highlights some of those projects. The main items were bike lanes, and so the lines that you see in green, like on Clarendon and on Edgefield and Davis, are streets where we're recommending bike lanes. The city's updating its bike plan as we speak, and so the map that we generate from this planning process is going to go to the transportation department to be added into that bike plan for the entire city to be implemented. Additionally, we know that there's a lot of opportunities around some of these commercial nodes to dramatically improve the public realm, improve crosswalks and sidewalks, and so we're making recommendations for all of those. And then lastly, and most importantly, land use and development. So the four main objectives were to preserve and protect existing single-family neighborhoods, promote transit-oriented development opportunities near high-quality transit, create walkable, neighborhood-scaled mixed-use centers, and preserve historic buildings and character through neighborhood-sensitive design. So this right here is a map that is the future land use map, the draft future land use map for West Oak Cliff. This can also be found on our interactive map on our social pinpoint website, which you can find the link in the chat. And for each of these, the future land use map is something that will align with and be incorporated into the city's citywide comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan is something that's also currently being updated as we speak. And that future land use map, that Fort Dallas will have a future land use map for the entire city. The land use map that's generated through the area plan is going to fit into that like a puzzle piece. So this is going to be one of the areas of the city that has one of the most detailed descriptions and future land use maps of the entire area, because we've gotten such comprehensive feedback and input. So the five main land use types that exist, or that we're recommending in West Oak Cliff, are residential neighborhood, which you see in yellow, neighborhood mixed use, urban residential, commercial center and corridors, and then open space, which are the areas in green. And so those definitions you can also see here on the slide. It is worth noting that there's an area that's kind of circled in an area bounded between Tyler, Clarendon, Edgefield, and the DART tracks. That's an area where there's a lack of consensus on the long-term vision for that area. There's some folks who desire it to remain a residential neighborhood, while there's others who are interested in seeing some development of some small multifamily and townhomes. That's something that we're continuing to have conversations with the community in those areas about. I know that there's some neighborhood association meetings coming up in a couple weeks, and something that I'll be presenting at, and your neighborhood leaders can provide more information on that. That's this area, if you can see my mouse, that's right here, bounded by Clarendon, Tyler, DART, and Edgefield. So this is a map that I'll explain it as we go through it. I just wanted to highlight areas that there's some recommendation to explore some zoning changes, in areas where we're not recommending any changes to zoning. The areas that you see in white, we're recommending absolutely no changes to what currently exists today. So that's about 65% of the study area. For the other areas, there's a variety of recommendations and changes that we're recommending. So the areas that you see in purple, those are areas where we're recommending allowing duplexes and accessory dwelling units. I should also note that this all has to do with locating some additional housing types near transit. Up near Jefferson Boulevard, there's the highest frequency bus route in the entire city is on that street. And so for that area, we're only recommending accessory dwelling units to be allowed, as well as the small area in the Northcliff Neighborhood Center. But in the other areas around the Tyler Vernon DART station and the Hampton station, we are recommending that accessory dwelling units and duplexes be allowed on single family lots in those areas as well. And then in terms of anything beyond residential changes, these are the only areas where we're recommending any sort of long-term exploration to change the zoning. Some of these areas are locations where we have authorized hearings that have already been filed. So that's Northcliff Center right here, Hampton Clarendon, downtown Elmwood, and then the small area at Clarendon and Edgefield. So those are areas where we have very specific recommendations written in this plan. For all of these other areas, the recommendation is long-term to consider that as an opportunity. Those would each require a separate authorized hearing to be filed by City Plan Commission or City Council, and those would each have a public process. So this area plan by no means changes the zoning. It's only recommending that in the future, there should be an exploration to do that. And that's the same for the recommendations for changing the zoning around transit in these areas that you see in purple. It doesn't change the zoning. It only recommends that there should be further study and consideration to do that in the future. So next I'm going to move into focus areas. So there are 7 focus areas in West Oak Cliff. These were identified by stuff that we heard from the community through our meetings, as well as feedback that we received from the task force throughout the process. And so these 7 are the West Davis Corridor, Northcliff Neighborhood Center, Hampton Clarendon, and then Jimtown's a separate focus area. I know it looks like one orange blob on here. Tyler Vernon Station area, downtown Elmwood, and the Hampton Station area. And so for each of these focus areas, there was a little bit of a tailored approach because each area is very distinct and different. So city staff and the area plan task force drafted out recommendations for all of these areas. We have a total of 61 recommendations. So that comes out to about, 8 to 10 per area related to land use and development, infrastructure, parks and open space, and inclusive community development. So those are all in the executive summary and in the plan. Each focus area has those action items that I mentioned. And then some areas, when there was a lot of infrastructure recommendations or improvements to roadways, there's the recommendations there are, we've got maps and drawings, and I'll show those in a second. I'm just seeing a question or two in the chat. One of the questions was a mention of zoning changes. How long would that happen? It depends on the location. So some of these areas where there's authorized hearings filed, that was way early in the presentation. Those are those 5 areas that were in purple. Those are the areas that once the area plan is adopted, city staff will be able to work to begin to bring recommendations to the community. So if the plan is adopted later this year, that process would begin after that. All of those other areas, which is most of the area that you see, that would be, 3 to 5 years, if not longer, probably in the 3 to 5 year time horizon to see those changes implemented. So it's not going to be overnight. It is going to require a continued community engagement, and staff, as part of the implementation, will continue to work with the community to do that. So I'm not going to go through each area because, again, it's a lot of recommendations per area, and we've been having ongoing meetings with neighborhood associations in these areas. But an example of just what some of these diagrams look like, Hampton and Clarendon is one of our focus areas. This is an area where we're recommending some improvements to the public realm. There's recommendations for bike lanes on Clarendon, getting new trees planted along Hampton, opportunities for a pocket park, new traffic signals to help mitigate and slow traffic speeds. So I wanted to capture all of that in here, and really welcome feedback on this once you've gotten a chance to review the plan. So another area was the Northclick Neighborhood Center. This is an area where we've got largely vacant buildings that have been sitting idle for many decades. The zoning is currently, this is an area where there is an authorized hearing for rezoning. We know that the zoning is one that is making it very difficult for any sort of uses to come into these buildings. There's parking requirements that are difficult. There's very specific uses that are allowed in there. So for instance, a coffee shop isn't allowed, but a barber shop is. And so trying to work through those specifics to identify the uses that are allowed is something that we've done through this process and made recommendations on. But we also know that this is an area where a lot of public realm improvements could go a long ways in improving this area. And so this just kind of shows an example of, what reconstructing the street and, creating new opportunities for open space and public gathering space could do to this area. That, in conjunction with some zoning changes, could really bring new life to these old buildings. And then lastly, just kind of wanted to show each area does have an action matrix. So it identifies an action item, a time frame of when that would be implemented, a lead agency or department who's responsible for it. So for a lot of these, you see planning and urban design, which is my department, but you also see public works if it's an infrastructure project. So each area has a matrix like this, and I encourage you to go take a look at the plan and really get to understand the recommendations for each area. So next, just a little bit about what's next. As the council member mentioned at the beginning of the call, we are going to have an in-person meeting on Saturday at 10 a.m. We've moved it from being outdoors at Martin Weiss Park to being indoors because it's supposed to be unseasonably cold. So I think everybody will appreciate being indoors because it's going to be in the 30s. So we'll have all of the recommendations there in both Spanish and English, as well as some of the informational slides from the beginning of this presentation there. That's going to be an open house, so you're welcome to come and go as you please. The meeting's from 10 to 11:30, and we'll have staff there on hand to answer questions, and we'll have staff there capable of speaking Spanish and English. Secondly, and a little more long term, we have in-person surveys and the executive summaries in Spanish and English available at the rec center as well. Those are going to be there for the next 2 months. So, if you have neighbors who are unable to make this meeting or don't have internet capabilities, they're welcome to complete a survey in person. We've got those surveys in both Spanish and English, and we've got a Dropbox there. But we also have instructions on there to, if somebody just wants to scan it and send it back to us, via email, that's something people can do as well. This QR code that you see on on the screen. That will take you to the survey as well. Additionally, I did mention that survey. So we've got that interactive social pinpoint website where the link, and Joe, if you got the opportunity, just drop that back in the chat just so that people don't have to scroll all the way to the top. We've got two different websites. So we've got our main website on our City Hall website, which is where you can access all the drafts and all the information. And then our interactive social pinpoint page has our survey, and it has our interactive future land use map. That is that website can easily be translated into 95 different languages. So the way to do that, at the very top of the page, there's a little icon that you see circled here. If you click on that, it allows you to translate it into any language, and it also translates the survey and all the materials into that language as well. Additionally, as I've noted, there are some upcoming meetings with neighborhood associations to continue to get input. If you're an active member of one of those neighborhood associations, you can expect to hear from those groups. But additionally, if your specific neighborhood or area is interested in having city staff come and talk to you, we can come in person, we can meet virtually. We just want to hear from you and get your thoughts on the plan. We're happy to use these next 2 months to get as much input as possible. I see a comment about March 17th or April 17th. I'll put my email address in the, if you don't mind, I'll put my email address in the chat, and feel free to send me an email and we can work to see if it's something that myself or somebody else on staff can attend. So I know there was a question in the chat about the adoption process, so I'll kind of end with that. So input from the community, what we hear from the online survey, the in-person survey, all the public meetings with the neighborhood associations that we have, we're going to take all of that, synthesize it, and bring it to the task force at the end of May. And we're going to work with the task force to make changes to the recommendations as needed. You know, we might hear that certain items are everybody is extremely supportive of, and other items people are really concerned about. And so we're gonna work through those one by one so that we have a draft plan that aligns with the overall consensus of the community. And at that point, we had a briefing to the City Plan Commission has a subcommittee, which is the Forward Dallas Comprehensive Land Use Committee. I presented to them yesterday, and we'll go back to them to start the adoption process once we have that draft plan at a place that people are comfortable and supportive. So that's really it for the presentation. Want to open it up to comments and questions. I know that there have been some questions in the chat. I've been trying to follow while presenting, but feel free to, you can either raise your hand or put a comment in the chat. I ask you not just all come off mute at once because that can get a little chaotic, but you can raise your hand with the reactions button and we'll go from there. I see a couple questions or hands. Haney, I see your hand first, so I'll let you ask.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, great. Just two real quick questions, I guess. You know, you talked about the bike trails, and you mentioned something about future bike trails being able to connect fully. Why not just add those future bike trails on the plan as well, so that's just there for them to plan? And then my second question is, why not add the ADUs by right and the entire West Oak Cliff area plan? It seems to stay in line with the vision.
Yeah, those are both great comments. On the bike lane piece, you know, we really tried to stay within our boundaries. I think that, you know, the map kind of says future connections to those trails. Those are in different council districts, and those are in neighborhoods where we haven't engaged. And so we don't want to speak for those neighborhoods without them having a voice. But those also align with long-term plans that the Parks Department has for those trails. So there are those citywide maps that speak to that. We're just hoping to kind of piece ours into there. But that's a really good comment. In terms of the accessory dwelling unit piece, another great comment. You know, that's not a recommendation that we made, but if that's something that, you know, we continue to hear, if there's consensus around, then, you know, it's a recommendation we can certainly add to this plan.
Yeah, I would say at least in my neighborhood, I've heard several people, wanting it to be easier to set up ADUs, and so yeah, if that can be added somewhere, or if we could submit those, we'd be happy to do so.
Excellent. And once you've done asking, I don't know if you're done, but if you're done, just be sure to lower your hand so that I know who to call on next. All right, kind of strange.
That's me. Hi. So I have grown up in the area my whole life, and I'm very much aware of the needs of the community. And I just want to put myself out there that I will offer myself as any feedback because I'm very connected to the people here and the people who live around here. And actually, the area you're rezoning is my house area. So, and speaking of which, when you're talking about the bike lane on Clarendon, that's very dangerous. If you've driven on Clarendon, I know you have like paint and like regular laws, but I don't believe that I've biked on Clarendon before, so I don't believe that people will follow those just paint guides. I think like more safety measures should be taken if you're going to add a bike lane on the area, which I think is a really great idea. Also, again, with that area, I believe it was North Clarendon. I forgot the area. Hold on, I'm sorry. It was the last one that you had pulled up. It was like where you changed the photo.
Oh, up in Northcliff.
Yes, North Cliff. So that's literally right by my house. And that area, I would suggest if there is any way to have yes, I think it is a good idea to rezone because a lot of stuff has not been able to pop up correctly there. But I would like to suggest that there be a cap on the rent. And then priority for people of the area to rent out those particular spaces, because the photo that you showed of what future plans of entailed, I don't really see that area turning into that unless you're moving other people in. Unless like it's other, because that's a different style of, I think, a demographic that is already here. That's a big traffic zone at night. So putting it in like a walking area seems dangerous for me. With the help of more businesses, I'm sure that'll change. But yeah, that was it. And I have a lot of other ones, but I think I'm gonna email you about it for a separate time. But those were just the two at the top of my head. But okay, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you and I apologize for the siren coming by my office. Thank you for those comments. On the bike lanes on Clarendon, one thing, ultimately the implementation of bike facilities is something that our transportation department does. Those would have meetings in terms of the design of those things when those move forward. But we agree that, paint is not enough for bike lanes. And so, the recommendation in the city's proposed path moving forward on bike facilities is to have protected bike lanes. So that would be a recommendation there. On Northcliff, rent cap or rent control is not something that we're as a city are legally allowed to do. But there are other ways that we can ensure that the zoning, works to ensure that the businesses are local. I mean, we can't require that a business owner live in Dallas or live in Northcliff. That's not something that we kind of have legal grounds to do. But we can ensure that, maybe square footage of a retail space is small so that it's dedicated to small local businesses instead of some person wanting to build a big business, something like that. So, there are ways that we can work with the community to make sure the zoning aligns with the vision.
Okay. Also, I know you guys want to turn it into businesses, but I believe that it'll work better as art studios.
That is one of our recommendations, is to allow art studios and allow maker spaces and as well as maybe, if somebody wants to open a small office space there, whether it's, it could be anything from like a co-working space, or maybe it's something like a Like I live near a little retail strip like this over in East Dallas, and there's an optometrist and a single attorney who has an office there. And so, those are other uses that are obviously neighborhood compatible and great additions to the neighborhood. So I see 2 more hands. I'll go through those, and then I see a whole lot of questions in the chat. So I'll start by with Christine Hopkins, and then I'll go to John Heimberger, and then I'll try to take the questions in the chat.
Hi, Daniel. So I was pretty surprised to see the purple circle areas that I think what they are half-mile radius around the Tyler Vernon Dart and the Hampton Dart.
That's correct.
That covers my house. It covers my neighbors Becky and Dan's house. And I don't understand what exactly is being proposed that would be allowed to be built there. Is it townhomes? Is it duplexes? Is it triplexes, quadplexes? Is it anything? Is it the same zoning that's over on 8th Street where those buildings are being demolished and, a new development is going to go up that is completely out of character for Oak Cliff? Because I want to know what to advocate for, to put in the plan to make it clear that we do not want to incentivize developers to come in and buy up land around these DART stations and then demolish all of the single family homes that are around there.
Yeah, that's a great comment and a great question. And I apologize I didn't get into the specifics of that. So the recommendation for your first question, yes, those circles, and I'll go back to that slide just so that it's clear. Those circles are a half mile from the DART stations. Those are areas that obviously capture and encompass a lot of single family residential neighborhoods. You've got Elmwood, Hampton Hills, Jimtown, South Edgefield, Polk Vernon. The recommendation that we have written in the plan is not just one opportunity. Could be some sort of a zoning overlay, which says this is zoned single family, but we also allow accessory dwelling units and duplexes by right. But the recommendation that we're really supporting and moving forward is to consider conservation districts in these neighborhoods. And so a conservation district is kind of like a historic district light. What that does is it's a separate zoning category that allows various, whatever the residential uses are that are desired by the community. So it can allow single family, it could allow quadplexes, whatever the community wants. But it means that new development has to be architecturally of the same architectural character and mass and scale of the surrounding existing homes. So that the process to create a conservation district is a fairly long one, where neighborhoods work with our conservation district staff here at City Hall to get the details right. So we've got architects on staff who are and historic preservationists who work to make sure that the details about the types of porches or roof angles or whatever that people in the community want are captured, so that in the future, if new development were to be constructed, it would fit in with the character of the neighborhood. So as part of that, the recommendation is in these areas to say that accessory dwelling units are already allowed in the city, but to get one, you have to go through the Board of Adjustment. We already have code that speaks to that says they can't be larger than 700 square feet. They have to be located behind the house. They have to provide parking, all of those kind of things. So the code for that would be the same. But for a duplex, for instance, if somebody wanted to build a duplex on their property, we're saying, yes, that's allowed, but it needs to fit in architecturally with the surrounding homes. And so there's a lot of ways that can be written. And that's something that we really is one that should be determined by the neighborhoods in the future through that conservation district process. It could be that if we look at a street or an area and no home is larger than 2,000 square feet, then the recommendation could be in the zoning that, that the footprint of a house needs to be the same as the average of the homes around it or something like that. So there's a lot of ways that the zoning can be used to ensure that new construction fits into the community. And this is another tool that helps to ensure that we know that there's a lot of areas around Oak Cliff and other areas of the city where old homes that maybe are in need of repair, their land value is lower, the property value is lower. The land value is high, but the property, the construction value is low. So a lot of developers are seeing those as opportunities to buy and tear down and build a house that fits, fills out the maximum of what's allowed on that lot. And we know that that's also not something that this community is necessarily interested in. And so we can use conservation districts as a tool to help ensure that that doesn't happen. Another question was John Heimberger, and then I'll go to the questions in the chat because I know that there's a lot of questions.
Yes, hello, this is John Tad Heimberger. I live near the Hampton Station area, and it's a good segue. So you were talking about the accessory dwelling units. I briefly looked over the plan and saw that one of the restrictions was those units couldn't be taller than the main structure. In a lot of these older small homes near the transit stations, those are often one-story homes, and yet you can see over the years there has been some additions built as a second story over the old detached garages. Rather than having that restriction for not taller than the current structure, I believe that at residential slope type protection would fit better into these neighborhoods, particularly since you mentioned the conservation district approach, where you stay with the old looking small single story homes, but by having them taller in the back, you still retain the feel and architectural look of the neighborhood, but you could still get these accessory dwelling units put in those areas. So that's a suggestion as I guess, a change to that.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And, we included language from the city code about accessory dwelling units in here, but the specifics of that could be worked through a conservation district to allow a garage to have an apartment on top. I know I live in a neighborhood where there's a lot of that as well. It definitely doesn't really change the character of the neighborhood. So that's a great idea and a great recommendation, and that's something that we can explore further.
Well, as said, to add that into it, so it's not just a hard, not taller than existing structures, to go ahead and put that in there now, because that would better fit most of the neighborhoods around these start stations. Though also, if you did, well, I believe there's probably going to need to be some, let's say, street parking restrictions as you get into higher density near these areas too, particularly because of the old narrow driveways. Access into residential driveways become a problem as you increase density like that. So I will go ahead and mute back again, let you get to your other questions.
Oh, no, thank you for that comment. And, it's a great one and one that, in terms of the parking and the driveways, we know that ensuring that we don't have just driveways taking up an entire front of yards is something that's, from an urban design perspective, highly desirable, is to have, narrow driveways, and something that we're recommending as well. So it's definitely something we're considering. And the lights kicked off in my office. So there we go. All right.
When I was referring to, I do
know
that you are looking at retaining narrow driveways. Unfortunately, with narrow driveways, if you get a lot of parking on the street, you can actually get so blocked in if you get many cars parking right up to a narrow driveway that the actual resident can no longer get egress into his own driveway. That happens a lot in some of these older neighborhoods. So that's what I meant by it's a different look at it. Rather than trying to retain that look, you actually have to restrict parking so you retain your access for your homeowners and renters.
Yeah, that's a great point, and thank you for that. So I know we answered Christine's question in the chat. The next one from Amy was, are there design guidelines or definitions about bike lanes or parklets? For both of those, yes. Parklets is something that was recently adopted kind of along with COVID that are allowed. There's a process for that through our transportation department. So that does require, there's a design review by that. And then for bike lanes, we have a complete street design manual. That's one thing that we, kind of as our default. We have a street design manual with street and paving design manual. And then we often use NACJO, which is the North American Council of Transportation Officials guidelines for bike lane design. But for all of those things, there would be public meetings for each of those kind of major infrastructure projects like that to make sure that what's getting constructed is something that the community supports. Another question was, are there plans for trails on Coombs Creek Drive between Jefferson and Ivandale? I'm asking mostly because the creek area is too narrow to add trails without using the road. Yeah, so that's an area that is one that obviously with the creek there, it's already kind of a nice natural connection point between Martin Weiss Park all the way up to Jefferson. But you're right, the right-of-way is extremely narrow. So we are recommending that a sidewalk gets built on that street there because currently it's there's no curb and gutter on that street. There's no sidewalk. I was actually drove on it this morning. And so there were pedestrians walking in the street. So it's definitely a street that we want to get sidewalks on if at all possible. You're right that the right-of-way dimensions are too tight for a trail. So really the recommendation there would be to get as wide of a sidewalk as possible to benefit the neighborhood, while also ensuring that we're being respectful and protective of the creek, because that's a great asset we don't want to be detrimental towards. Another question for our comment from Maria Mendoza. We have incredible small businesses that are thriving in our area, and I fear the development would push them out of their neighborhood. Yeah, so we heard comments related to retail affordability and housing affordability through this process. We have a whole section of recommendations related to small businesses. The city's got a small business center that was just created about 3 months ago, and that group they're just getting started, but they have a lot of great tools. They've got funding sources for small businesses that maybe want to do small capital improvements like facade improvements. And they've got loans for businesses that have been impacted by COVID. So there's a lot of great tools out there. And one of our recommendations is to also create a West Oak Cliff Business Owners Task Force so that businesses can continue to communicate with each other and work with the city to be aware of these tools, and continue to work through barriers that exist for businesses, because we definitely want to maintain the existing character of businesses in this area. I see Ms. Brown's question about how the purple areas were chosen. As I mentioned, that the purple areas on that map, if I assume you're speaking about this map, I'll get back to it. Those circles are a half mile from the DART station. And then these areas up here are a quarter mile from Jefferson Boulevard, which is where the busiest bus in the entire system runs. In terms of the purple areas from way early in the presentation, click back to that. So these purple areas, those are the areas that there have already been authorized hearings for rezoning filed. Those were filed, some of them are over 3 years old. So, or I think some of them were filed in 2017. So some of them might be 5 years old. So those were filed a long time ago by either former Commissioner West when he was plan commissioner, or by your previous council member. So those have been there for years, and they've been unable to move forward because there's not an area plan for this area. Question from Jennifer Harrison. Are there any plans to clean up the level of trash in this area? So, this is a plan that obviously speaks to land use. And so things that relate to issues like sanitation, this plan can't specifically speak to, but we relay those comments on to code compliance. We relay them on to sanitation so that they know that there are issues. If there is a specific area that you'd like to see cleaned up or you have concern about, let us know, because we're happy to pass that along. A lot of this is an issue of code compliance, and that's an issue we've heard throughout. And we're continuing to work with our code compliance department to ensure that they're working West Oak Cliff. Haney, when is the deadline to submit comments? We'd like them by May 10th. So that's what's on the survey. That's at the rec center. So that's 2 months from today. One of the questions, will the plan include additional street lighting within neighborhoods? Obviously, there are great needs on all of the streets in West Oak Cliff and in the city. And so in terms of what's actionable in the near future, not every street is actionable, but we are making recommendations for street lighting and improvement on a lot of the major streets, streets where we know that pedestrians are often walking, where there's retail, maybe they're near transit or near schools and parks. Those are places where we've recommended lighting be installed as soon as possible. Trying to read through the next question. I see a question from Christine, but the burden would be on us to create those conservation districts. What are we approving by the changes in the meantime under the matrix? The area plan is only a vision. What it means is, the recommendation in there is that the neighborhoods work with the city to implement a conservation district or maybe some other tool for those areas. The city has staff that are, able and willing to work with the community. But, to go recommend potential changes in a single family neighborhood without the community at the table is not something that the city is doing. We definitely want the community to be involved. And so some of these recommendations, the onus is on the community to advocate and push for some of these things. Some items like new sidewalk repair, we've already pushed the list of recommendations on to those appropriate departments, and they have them in their list of needs, and they're working on getting funding for them now, and hopefully they'll be implemented soon. But some of these other items do require continued work between our department in planning and urban design and the community to make happen. So one of the comments was, so in these single family neighborhoods, if a developer buys 2 lots side by side, they could build a 4-plex. One of our recommendations is to not allow for replatting of single family zoning to allow that to happen. That as you begin to change the lot size, you begin to really change neighborhood character. Platting is something that's approved by, they go through City Plan Commission. And we can also use a conservation district as it would be a way to potentially regulate that as well. So that's not something that we're recommending, because we'd like to see, we are recommending that quadplexes can be allowed on larger lots throughout West Oak Cliff, but we don't want to see lot consolidation to begin to see new denser development that's completely out of character of the neighborhood. See a lot of really great comments in the chat, and I really appreciate a lot of this. I know that there are some questions. I'm trying to read through the comments versus the questions as my light kicks off in my office again. One question: when will the discussion continue on Tyler Vernon Station area? I know that there is a meeting scheduled. I'm scheduled to speak at, that's being hosted by some neighborhood associations on Saturday, March 26th at the Church of Latter-day Saints. I believe they're on Vernon. If somebody's got specific information, it looks like information already got put in the chat. Okay, well that's the information that I have. So we'll be continuing that conversation then. Question from Andrew Wallace: has the city calculated the added tax income that the added density would bring in order to pay for our basic city services that are lacking? Would the greater density pay for filling potholes and shorter police response times? That's a great comment. If you increase land value, you increase tax rolls and generate more revenue for the city. That, that is a fact. In terms of how that's distributed, there's kind of two different ways that it's distributed. Most of that money just goes into the general fund for the city and is distributed equally across the city. I know that doesn't help for specific targeted actions right in your neighborhood. There are some things that become a little bit more localized. We've got service areas for our police department. We've got dedication areas, I think's their name, for the parks department. And so we've got a park dedication fee. So what that essentially is if a developer builds something anywhere, they've got to pay it's essentially a tax. They got to pay some money to help pay for open space somewhere in the city. But that money stays close-ish to where that development is. It has to be in one of the 7 quadrants of Dallas. All right, looking to see if there's any other questions. Will there be a way to allow smaller Oak Cliff schools to have more parking space or larger areas for student pickup? I notice that causes a lot of traffic. Yeah, traffic around schools is something that we hear a lot about. All schools are required to work with our transportation department to have a traffic impact study and a traffic plan. We're not recommending any streets getting any wider in West Oak Cliff. In terms of specifics at each individual school, if there's a specific school that comes to mind, let us know, because we might want to work with our transportation department on that. I also know that a lot of, DISD is in the process of renovating and expanding a lot of the schools in the district because they have a large bond and a lot of money. And so with that, we do begin to see new and reimagined traffic pickup plans for each of those schools when that happens. But if you have a specific location, let us know. Questions? Question from Christine Hopkins. There are Latino families who have owned homes for 30 years, multiple generations on Nolte, north of Tyler Vernon Dart Station. So we are displacing families to build anything there. Sadly, there is nowhere affordable for these families to go in Oak Cliff now. So what is the plan for where these families live? That's obviously, that's a single example of an issue that we experience citywide. It's a great comment. And displacement is something that we're unfortunately seeing as land value and as rent goes up, and we're seeing it throughout the city. The plan does have a lot of strategies that speak to helping existing homeowners maintain their property. So there's a couple strategies that we've outlined. One is there's a lot of funding that exists in the housing department to help for home repair. So that allows folks to maintain and upkeep their homes so that they can stay where they are and aren't living in in poor conditions. But in terms of that obviously requires money, and improvements can increase your taxable value of your home. So we do have a recommendation as well for a neighborhood improvement zone to be created in West Oak Cliff. Neighborhood improvement zones exist throughout Dallas. They were implemented, I should say that we created them and implemented them right at the beginning of the pandemic. So they haven't been as well advertised or promoted because of the last 2 years, but our housing department's working on that, and we're working hand in hand with the housing department on getting a neighborhood empowerment zone established for West Oak Cliff. What that does is it allows for existing homeowners who make improvements to their home to not any added tax value that would add to their property. They're not responsible for that tax burden for another 10 years. So it helps lessen tax burden while also allowing for home improvements. Ultimately, if the area is rezoned, that's a process that would require working with those property owners and approval from those property owners. This plan is not saying that we're going to do that. It's only, again, for that area, we're continuing conversations. And long term, the recommendation would be to consider it if that's something that the community is interested in. Another question from Amy. Has there been any sort of a study of downtown Elmwood for the current amount of public parking amount of potential private lot parking, talking to businesses to understand their business needs. How are you determining the amount of parking needed in the future versus current zoning requirements? So, parking is something that's being studied citywide. We have citywide parking code reform that's currently ongoing. But in addition to that, we also have, for downtown Elmwood, we know in a lot of these old areas with buildings that are built right up to property lines that are on small lots, a lot of times businesses can't become tenants in those buildings because a developer or an owner of that building can't provide enough parking. Restaurants have an extremely high parking ratio. I think it's something like 1 space for every 100 square feet. So even if you have a tiny little 2,000 square foot coffee shop, that's 20 parking spaces that are required, which is larger than the building itself. And so for most of these buildings, they're not able to provide that. And so a lot of buildings are unable to find maybe the types of tenants that they want. So we are recommending for downtown Elmwood specifically a couple strategies. For some legacy buildings, so some of those older structures that exist, really considering exploring, parking reductions for those so that it's easier for them to have the amount of parking that's required for certain tenants, like a restaurant or a coffee shop. Additionally, we're also recommending that there's opportunities for shared parking strategies. So a good example, kind of as you mentioned, would be there's a church and there's the Masonic Temple right there. Would there be an opportunity for those lots that sit vacant a lot of time to have an agreement struck with a nearby restaurant or use to be able to park there during certain hours? So those are both strategies that we're recommending. And we're also recommending improvements to Edgefield to create new dedicated on-street parking so that there's just more available on-street parking added in the area as well. A comment from Jennifer: could we include affordable housing at Tyler Station if they build up, or at Hampton Station? So one of the things that the city has on our in our policy is something known as our mixed income housing bonus. And so what that essentially says is it allows for some additional development entitlement under the condition that a certain percentage of units are set aside to be affordable. And the way we define affordable is it's a sliding scale, so it's really complex, but it would be anything less than 80% of area median income. So that would be for families who make an individual who makes about $40,000 a year or less, or families who make roughly $60,000 a year or less. And so these are, I think there's often a misunderstanding about what affordable housing is. These are teachers and firefighters who aren't able to afford rent. And so the recommendation could easily be for that area to say, yes, additional density is warranted, but with that give back that a certain percentage has to be set aside. And I see the comment about the Hampton Station, 10% is a starting point, but if the community desires more, then that's definitely something that we can amend in the plan. All right, I see a few final questions. Does the 10-year tax waiver on the increase in value following improvements apply just to the City of Dallas property tax? That is correct. It's only to the City of Dallas property tax because that's the only thing that the city controls from a policy perspective is city tax. And then I see a hand from Jennifer. So feel free to ask your question, Jennifer.
Oh, hi, thank you. I was actually just going to type it in the chat because I saw you were going through the chat. Well, one, I wanted to thank you because I've been through a couple of these meetings where you're taking input, and you've always been so gracious and so open to input, and it's been really great to be a part of this process so far. I was going to build upon the Tyler Station, Hampton Station, but you answered that really well. But I think most of our neighbors are all for building up Tyler Station, building up Hampton Station, because Oak Cliff should be a destination. We've got a lot of awesome things happening here. Even in the presentation, there was pictures taken from Tyler Station of the Oak Cliff mural. So, I think most neighbors like seeing Oak Cliff highlighted, and that's a great thing. But like we were saying in the chat, the concern is displacing our neighbors. We do want to make sure there is affordable housing for them. and we don't want to really kick anybody out of our neighborhood or anything like that. But another comment I have on that, I know you mentioned that there were tax plans. Is there a plan or a consideration with all of this to make that information more easier to find? I am a new homeowner this year, and even just filing my homestead exemption taxes was a headache. And I have to reapply again because I missed something on the application. With these new changes, is there a way to incorporate perhaps maybe additional trainings or live webinars for these families so that they know how to apply for those programs to help build up their homes, to if they do qualify for affordable housing? Is there a way that we can make that information or even workshops more readily available for them, since it is targeted to this area? And I know it is district-wide, not district, sorry. I work for the district, but I mean citywide. Is there a way that we can make that information just a little bit more readily available? And just in my personal scenario, like when I went to the homestead or the appraisal district, the offices were closed. I tried to talk to a real person. You couldn't, you had to slip your information through a little window. And I think if I was able to talk to a real person, I would have been able to fix my issue a lot quicker. So, and I'm also thinking of, I am English speaking, so it's easier for me, but even our Spanish speaking neighbors, and this is a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood, can we, is it possible to consider just additional resources for those families to help them through this process?
Yeah, no, that's a really excellent comment and something that we heard from the task force and from others. Obviously our housing department is the one that manages all of that, but we really worked in unison with the housing department to understand their programs, to understand their capacity. And one of our recommendations in this plan, I think it's actually two separate recommendations, is a really comprehensive education and outreach strategy out to West Oak Cliff, but ultimately would be to the entire city as well, to let people know about these various programs, whether it's homestead exemption programs, veteran exemption, senior exemptions, whether it's the various home repair grants that the city has, all of those things, as well as opportunities to access affordable housing. Because, the city, the comment about displacing neighbors, some folks, you're right, they may, maybe they're tenants and their landlord decides, hey, I'm going to tear this thing down and build a new house. That doesn't really help them. But if they're aware of the ability to sign up to find additional housing opportunities, because the city's got 26,000 dedicated affordable units around the entire city that are set aside for people who make less than 80% area median income. So there's a lot of opportunities. It's just helping get people navigated to those resources. So that's definitely a recommendation that we've included, and one that I think is really important. I see a question from Albert. What is the process methodology for turning survey responses into ideas that end up in the plan? That's a great question. Some of it might depend on how many surveys we get back and how much input we get back. I'll provide scans of all of that information to the task force, but that might be a lot to read through. So really my job is going to be to go through and to understand what are the most prescient items. If one or two recommendations keep coming up that people are really concerned about, then we need to highlight that and talk about that as a task force. Or if there's additional ideas around certain topics, I'll kind of try to consolidate all of those into and bring all of that information to the task force. And again, the task force meetings are all open to the public. Historically, we've been meeting virtually because of the pandemic and because of the Omicron variant. But hopefully by May, we'll be meeting in person. So that's a great question though. I don't see any additional hands or any additional questions. I know it's been an hour and a half, and I really appreciate everybody's time. And once again, I'll go back to the slide just real fast. I want to remind people that we do have that public meeting. A lot of the material is going to be the same, but if you want to take a look at the actual plan on a board and talk to us in person, we'll be there Saturday, the 12th at 10 a.m. Please let your neighbors know about that. We've been getting the word out through all of our channels, but if you see a neighbor in the street, and they don't know about the effort, let them know so that they're able to attend and provide their input. And again, my name is Daniel Church. My email address is daniel.church@dallascityhall.com. Feel free to shoot me an email anytime if you've got a comment. You can also call me I'll put it in the chat, but 214-671-5149. That way you can also reach me that way. And I really appreciate everybody taking the time this evening to be on the call. And thank you all.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. These meetings are always so great. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thank you for attending.